Commander Xylith stood at the observation deck of the Valoran cruiser. Gentle whisper and watched the human warship float in the darkness of space. The vessel was ugly by Concord standards. It had no graceful curves or shimmering hull plating. It was all sharp angles and thick armor built like a fist waiting to strike. The humans had named it Relentless, and Xylith found the name both amusing and slightly unsettling. She was an insectoid creature, tall and thin, with 4 arms and compound eyes that could process visual information faster than most species in the galaxy. Her people, the Valorans, were known throughout the galactic Concord as record-keepers and observers. They documented everything: wars, treaties, first contacts, extinctions. For 3,000 years, the Valorans had watched the rise and fall of civilizations across 100 star systems. Died. Now they wanted her to watch the humans. Xylith clicked her mandibles in quiet frustration. She had studied the reports on humanity. They were a young species, barely 5 years into their membership with the Concord. They lived short lives, rarely more than a century. Their bodies were soft and fragile compared to most space-faring races. They could not see in the dark, like the CF, could not regenerate limbs, like the Morvani, and could not survive in vacuum like the silicon-based hollows by every measure that mattered. Humans were unremarkable. And yet, the Concord High Council had specifically requested a senior observer for this mission. That fact alone made Xylith nervous. The Dree sovereignty had invaded a Concord-protected colony on Catherine IV. The Dreth were reptilian warriors, cold-blooded in both body and temperament. They had conquered 12 worlds in the past century. When they attacked a planet, other species ran. It was simply what one did when facing the Dreth. You calculated your losses, evacuated who you could, and negotiated for the return of territory later. But the humans had not run. They had volunteered to fight. Xylith boarded the human vessel 3 hours before the battle was scheduled to begin. A young officer met her at the airlock. He was tall for a human, with brown skin and a shaved head. His uniform was crisp, but his smile was casual, almost lazy. "Commander Xylith," he said, "I'm Lieutenant Jake Morrison. Welcome aboard the Relentless. Sorry about the mess. We've been running drills all week." Xylith looked around. The corridor was clean and orderly. "I see no mess." Morrison laughed. "Figure of speech. Come on, I'll take you to the observation bay. You'll have a good view of the drop from there." As they walked through the ship, Xylith observed everything. Human crew members moved with purpose, checking equipment, running diagnostics, calling out to each other in their strange emotional language. What struck her most was the noise. The ship was loud with conversation, laughter, and music playing from somewhere deep in the vessel. On a Valoran ship approaching combat, there would be silence, meditation, preparation for death. These humans acted like they were going to a celebration. "You are not afraid?" Xylith said. It was not a question. Morrison glanced at her. "Afraid of what?" "The battle. The Dreth have never lost a ground engagement. Their warriors are larger, stronger, and more numerous than your forces. Statistical analysis suggests your casualties will be significant." The lieutenant was quiet for a moment, then he shrugged. "Probably, but somebody's got to help. Those colonists might as well be us." Xylith did not understand this response. She filed it away for later analysis. They reached the observation bay, a large room with reinforced windows, looking out over the ship's hangar. Below, dozens of Marines were preparing. For combat, they loaded weapons, checked armor seals, and helped each other with equipment. Xylith watched a female soldier punch a male soldier in the shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. Both of them laughed. That is Corporal Megan Shaw, Morrison said, noticing her gaze. She's my second in command, best medic in the unit, also the meanest. She struck her fellow soldier. That's just how she says good luck. Xylith added this to her notes. Human bonding rituals involve ritualized violence, purpose unclear. A young Marine approached Morrison. He looked barely old enough to be considered an adult by human standards. His hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted his helmet. Lieutenant, the young one said. First drop. Any advice? Morrison put a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, Vance, stay close to Shaw. Do what she tells you. And remember, we all go home together. That's the rule. Private Danny Vance nodded, swallowing hard. Together, got it. Morrison squeezed his shoulder once and then let go. The young Marine walked back to his squad, and Xylith saw Shaw immediately pull him into the group, handing him extra ammunition and speaking to him in low, reassuring tones. You tell your soldiers they will all go home, Xylith said. This is statistically unlikely to be true. Morrison's jaw tightened for a moment. Something hard flashed in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that easy calm. It's not about statistics, Commander. It's about making sure everyone knows we don't leave people behind ever. That's what makes us fight harder. An alarm sounded. Red lights flashed along the corridor. A voice announced over the ship speakers that drop pods would launch in 10 minutes. The Marines below moved into formation. They helped each other into the drop pods, cylindrical metal containers that would carry them through the atmosphere and onto the battlefield. Xylith noticed that they touched each other constantly. Pats on the back, clasped hands, bumped fists. Some pressed their foreheads together and spoke words too quiet to hear. Then, as the pod doors began to close, they started to sing. It was not a beautiful song. Human voices were rough and imperfect compared to the harmonic species of the conquered, but there was something in the sound that made Zill's antennae twitch. The words spoke of fallen comrades, of battles long past, of coming home. The Marines sang together, their voices rising and falling in unison, and for a moment the ship felt like a single living creature drawing breath before a plunge. The pods launched. Xyle watched them fall toward the moon below like metal seeds scattered by a careless hand. She began her first official report to the conquered archives. After several minutes of careful consideration, she wrote, "They do not behave like beings approaching death. They behave like beings who have already decided that death is not an acceptable outcome. I do not yet understand what this means, but I'm beginning to suspect that the conquered has underestimated these creatures." She paused, watching the last pod disappear into the clouds of Catherine 4. "I am beginning to suspect that everyone has." The drop pod hit the ground hard enough to rattle Jake Morrison's teeth. Emergency bolts blew the hatch open, and he was moving before the dust settled. Rifle up, scanning for targets. The thin atmosphere of Catherine 4 made every sound sharp and strange. Gunfire echoed off the ruins of the mining colony like thunder trapped in a bottle. 2 pods had been destroyed during descent. Morrison had seen them explode on his helmet's display, bright flowers of fire, blooming against the gray sky. 12. Marines gone before they even touched ground. He pushed the thought aside. Grief was for later. Right now there was only the mission. Shaw report, he said. Into his communicator. I'm 300 meters east of your position, came the reply. Megan Shaw's voice was calm, almost bored. Somewhere behind her words, Morrison could hear the rapid crack of her rifle. Got hostiles everywhere. Vance is with me. Kids doing okay, good. Rally on my position. We push for the colony center. Morrison moved through the ruins, stepping over broken concrete and twisted metal. The mining colony had been home to 10,000 people before the Dree came. Now it was a graveyard of empty buildings and shattered dreams. He tried not to look at the bodies. Some were human colonists, some were other species. The death had not been gentle. He found a squad of Marines pinned down behind a collapsed wall. Their sergeant was dead, and the survivors looked at Morrison with wild, desperate eyes. He knelt beside them, speaking in a low, steady voice. Listen to me. We're going to move in 30 seconds. I'll draw their fire. You push left and take that building. Understood? A corporal with blood on his face nodded. Understood, sir. Morrison counted down, then stood and ran into the open. Plasma bolts hissed past him, burning the air. He fired as he moved, not aiming to kill, but to distract. The Dreth turned their weapons toward him, and the pinned Marines used that moment to sprint for cover. 3 of them made it, 1 did not. Morrison slid behind a metal barrier and kept firing. The Dreth were exactly as the reports described. They stood over 2 m tall, covered in thick scales the color of dried blood. Their eyes were yellow and cold. Their movements quick and precise. They fought without fear because their species had never learned to feel it. Fear was for prey, and the Dreth had never been prey. Morrison watched a Dreth warrior charge toward his position. He put 3 rounds into its chest, but the creature kept coming. A 4th round caught it in the throat, and it finally fell, crashing to the ground less than 5 m from where he crouched. They're tough, he muttered. We're tougher, said Shaw, sliding into cover beside him. Her armor was scorched, and there was a cut on her cheek, but she was grinning. Behind her, Private Vance followed, moving with the clumsy urgency of someone fighting in their first real battle. Vance, you good? Morrison asked. The young Marine's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I'm good, sir, ready to move. Xylith watched all of this through drone feed aboard the Gentle Whisper. Her compound eyes processed multiple angles at once, tracking dozens of individual combatants across the battlefield. What she saw did not match any of her predictions. The humans should have retreated by now. They had lost nearly 40% of their initial force. By conquered military doctrine, any unit that sustained such casualties was considered combat ineffective. The proper response was withdrawal, regrouping, and reassessment. The humans were advancing. She watched a Marine take a plasma bolt to the shoulder. The wound was severe. The flesh burned away to reveal bone. Any rational creature would collapse, would scream, would beg for extraction. Instead, the Marine wrapped the wound with a field bandage, picked up his rifle with his remaining good arm, and kept fighting. It was Private Vance, the same young soldier she had observed before the drop, trembling with fear as he asked his lieutenant for advice. This is not possible, Xylith said to herself on the surface. Megan. Shaw grabbed a fallen comrade and dragged him toward cover. The man was unconscious, bleeding from multiple wounds. Shaw moved backward, firing her pistol at pursuing Dreth while pulling the wounded Marine with her other hand. A plasma bolt struck the ground near her feet. She did not flinch. She did not stop. Xylith made a note in her report. They carry their wounded. They do not abandon their dead. From a tactical perspective, this is inefficient. It slows their advance and exposes them to additional risk, and yet they do it. Anyway, I am beginning to understand why. This is terrifying. Commander Vor of the Dreth Sovereignty stood in his command center and stared at the tactical display. His forces outnumbered the humans 3-1. His warriors were stronger, faster, and better equipped. By every calculation, the battle should have been over within the first hour. It had been 4 hours. The humans were still fighting. This does not make sense, said his tactical advisor Cell. She was smaller than Vorath, her scales a darker shade of crimson. Her mind was sharp and her confusion was obvious. They have sustained catastrophic losses. Why do they not retreat? Vor growled, low in his throat. Perhaps they are simply stupid. No. Sarel studied the data streams flowing across her console. Their tactics are sound. Their coordination is excellent. They adapt to our strategies faster than any species I have encountered. They are not stupid. They are something else. On the battlefield, Lieutenant Morrison led his remaining forces toward the colony's central plaza. The Dreth had fortified the position, but Morrison did not hesitate. He split his team into 3 groups, coordinated a simultaneous assault, and punched through the enemy line with brutal efficiency. Xylith watched him fight. He was not the largest human, not the strongest, but there was something in the way he moved, something in the set of his jaw and the focus in his eyes. He had been shot twice. He had watched friends die, and still he pushed forward. Still he fought. Still he refused to stop. She added another note to her report. I asked the human officer why they fight so hard. He told me that everyone goes home together. This is their rule. It is not a strategy. It is not a calculation. It is something deeper. They would rather die than leave each other behind. I do not have a word for this in my language. The closest translation would be love, but that does not feel adequate. The battle continued into the night. The humans did not rest. They rotated positions, took brief naps and shifts, and kept fighting. Vora threw more warriors at them, and more warriors fell. By midnight, the Dreth had lost 500 soldiers. The humans had lost 200, but the ones who remained showed no sign of slowing down. Vorath stared at the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in 50 years of conquest. Uncertainty. What are these creatures? He asked. Cell had no answer. She was too busy watching Megan Shaw on the sensor feed. The human medic had just charged across an open plaza under heavy fire to reach a wounded Marine. She performed emergency surgery while plasma bolts struck the ground around her. Then she picked up the injured soldier and carried him to safety. She was laughing the entire time. Sir made a note of her own. I think we may have made a serious mistake. The tunnels beneath the mining colony were dark and narrow. They had been built for workers, not warriors, and the Low ceilings forced the tall dress. Soldiers to crouch as they moved. 4. The humans, the tight spaces were almost comfortable. Jake Morrison led his team through the underground maze. Following maps pulled from the colony's damaged computer systems, they had been fighting for 18 hours straight. Morrison's body was screaming at him to stop. He had a broken rib from a breath blade that had slipped past his armor. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. His left arm was bruised purple from a fall during the initial assault. He had not slept in over 30 hours, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. He kept moving behind him. His squad followed in silence. Megan Shaw walked with a limp she was trying to hide. Private Vance had stopped shaking hours ago, replaced by a cold focus that made him look older than his 19 years. Specialist Chris Nguyen brought up the rear, his demolitions pack heavy on his back, his face unreadable in the dim light. They found a breath patrol around the next corner. The fight was short and vicious. Morrison killed 2 before they could raise their weapons. Shaw took down a third with a knife to the throat. Vance and Nguyen handled the rest. When it was over, the squad did not celebrate. They checked their ammunition, treated their wounds, and kept moving. Xylith watched through a network of micro-drones she had scattered through the tunnel system. Her fellow observer, senior analyst Malfoy, spoke to her through a secure communication channel. His species communicated through color patterns that shifted across their gelatinous bodies, but the translation software converted his words to audio. Your reports are causing concern among the High Council. Malloy said, several members believe you are exaggerating. Xylith's mandibles clicked in frustration. I am reporting exactly what I observe. The humans have been engaged in continuous combat for 18 hours. They have not stopped to rest. They have not stopped to eat. They simply keep fighting. That is biologically impossible. No organic species can sustain such activity without significant rest periods. No. Xylith adjusted her drone feeds, focusing on Lieutenant Morrison. He was crouched behind a support pillar, reloading his rifle. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but she could see the tremors of exhaustion in his fingers, and yet they continue. I have observed them taking what they call power naps, brief periods of sleep lasting no more than 20 minutes. They rotate so someone is always awake and alert. It is not enough rest by any medical standard, but somehow it is enough for them. Modo was silent for a long moment. You are suggesting that humans can function effectively on minimal sleep during extended combat operations. I am not suggesting it. I am watching it happen. In the tunnels, Morrison called a brief halt. They had found a small maintenance room empty except for old equipment and dust. The squad filed in, and Morrison assigned watch rotations with quick hand signals. 20 minutes, he said. Get some rest. Nen, you're on first watch. Shaw sat down against the wall and closed her eyes. Within seconds she was asleep. Vance hesitated, still wired with adrenaline, but Morrison put a hand on his shoulder. Snort, sleep, Private. Your body needs it. We've got a long way to go. Vance nodded and found a spot next to Shaw. He was unconscious within a minute. Morrison stayed awake, reviewing the tunnel maps on his tactical display. He pressed a hand to his broken rib and winced. You should rest too, sir, Nguyen said quietly. Morrison shook his head. I'll sleep when we're done. With respect, Lieutenant, you've been awake longer than any of us. Then I'll set a good example. Morrison smiled, but there was iron behind his eyes. We don't stop until those colonists are safe. That's the mission. Nan did not argue. He had served with Morrison for 3 years. He knew that look. Xylith documented this exchange carefully. She had begun to develop a theory about human endurance, and this conversation supported it. The humans were not fighting because they had to. They were fighting because they refused to accept any other option. Their bodies were failing, their resources were depleted, and by every rational measure they should have collapsed hours ago. But human she was learning did not operate by rational measures. She wrote in her report, I have identified a concept in human psychology that has no direct translation in Valoran. The closest approximation would be spite. It refers to a willingness to continue an action purely to prove that one cannot be stopped. Humans appear to draw strength from this emotion. When faced with impossible odds, they do not calculate the probability of success. They simply become angry that anyone would expect them to fail. 2 hours later, the squad encountered a Dree defensive position blocking the main tunnel. 20 warriors, heavily armed with barricades and mounted weapons. A frontal assault would be suicide. Nguyen studied the ceiling for a long moment. He ran his fingers along the rock, feeling the texture, examining the support structures. I can bring it down, he said. Morrison looked at him. The whole tunnel, just this section. These support beams are old, probably installed during the original construction. See how the rock is fractured along these lines, one-shaped. Charge in the right place, and the whole thing comes down on their heads. How do you know it won't collapse on us too? Nguyen shrugged. I grew up in earthquake country, California. You learn what breaks and what doesn't. He paused. I'm about 70% sure. Morrison considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Do it. The squad pulled back to a safe distance while Yan set his charges. He worked quickly and quietly, his hands steady despite the danger. When he was finished, he gave Morrison a thumbs up and triggered the detonator. The explosion was loud enough to make Xylith's drone shake. The tunnel ceiling collapsed with a roar of breaking stone and screaming metal. Dust and debris filled the passage, and when it cleared, the Dreth position was buried under tons of rock. Shaw coughed and waved dust away from her face. Nice work, Nguyen, the specialist nodded. Told you it would work, you said 70%. I rounded up. They pushed forward through the newly opened path, climbing over rubble and past the broken remains of Dree soldiers. Xylith watched them move with something approaching awe. They had just buried 20 enemy warriors using nothing but a handful of explosives and intuition gained from surviving natural disasters on their home world. She sent another report to Malloys. I have made a new observation. Humans do not simply adapt to hostile environments. They internalize the lessons of survival and apply them in unexpected ways. Their home world is apparently prone to catastrophic geological events. Rather than viewing this as a weakness, they have transformed it into a tactical advantage. I am beginning to believe that there is no situation humans cannot turn to their benefit. They are not surviving this battle, they are learning from it. Maldo did not respond for several minutes. When he finally did, his message was short. I am forwarding your reports to the full High Council. They need to see this dot in the tunnels. Morrison led his squad deeper into the darkness. They were tired, wounded and outnumbered, but they were still moving forward. They were still fighting, and somewhere above them, Commander Vor was beginning to realize that he was not fighting ordinary soldiers. He was fighting humans, and humans did not know how to stop. Commander Varro stood before the tactical display in his command center and watched his empire crumble. The humans had broken through 3 defensive lines. They had destroyed his supply depot. They had cut his communications with the orbiting fleet. And they were still coming. He was a warrior who had conquered 12 worlds. He had fought the Morvani in their jungle homelands and the Kree in the frozen darkness of their underground cities. He had never lost a battle, never felt the cold grip of doubt in his chest. He felt it now. Status report. He demanded us all. Worked at her console, her claws clicking against the interface. We have lost 643 warriors. The humans have lost approximately 250. Their remaining forces are converging on this position from 3 directions. How many humans remain? Our best estimate is between 80 and 100 active combatants. Borith's eyes narrowed. We still outnumber them 4-1. Yes, Commander, but they do not fight like they are outnumbered. Sarah pulled up a data stream on her display. I have been analyzing intercepted human communications, their military history, their cultural records. I believe I understand what we are facing. Explain. Sarah turned to face him. Her yellow eyes were troubled. Humans have been at war with each other for their entire existence as a species. Their home world has seen thousands of conflicts over territory, resources, ideology. Millions of their kind have died in these wars, perhaps billions over the course of their history. Vor waved a clawed hand dismissively. Many species war with themselves. It proves nothing except their primitive nature. You misunderstand, Commander. They are not primitive, they are practiced. Sarah brought up images from human history. Massive armies clashing across scarred landscapes, soldiers charging into certain death, cities burning while their defenders refused to surrender. They have been training for war since before they discovered fire. Every generation produces new warriors. Every conflict teaches new lessons. They have refined the art of killing to a degree that few species in the galaxy can match. Vor studied the images. He saw humans with primitive weapons, fighting in trenches filled with mud and blood. He saw humans in advanced armor, storming fortified positions. He saw humans laughing, crying, dying, and killing, always killing. This explains their tactics, he admitted. It does not explain their endurance. Surall hesitated. There is another factor, something I do not fully understand. She played a recording from the battlefield. It showed 2 human soldiers, one wounded and one healthy. The healthy one was dragging the wounded one to safety. While under heavy fire, they protect each other beyond all rational limit. They risk their lives not for tactical advantage, but simply because one of their own is in danger. It makes them unpredictable. It makes them dangerous. Above the planet, Admiral Karin Price watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Relentless. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she had been commanding warships since before most of her crew was born. The tactical display showed her Marines pushing toward the Dreth command center. They were taking heavy casualties, but they were winning. Lieutenant Morrison's team has breached the inner perimeter, her tactical officer reported. They're 10 minutes from the primary target. Price nodded. Tell them to keep pushing. We end this today. On the surface, Morrison led his squad through the final stretch of tunnels. They had been fighting for 26 hours. His broken rib had shifted, and every breath was agony. Shaw was bleeding from a wound in her side that she had refused to let anyone treat. Vance had run out of ammunition and was carrying a weapon scavenged from a dead warrior. Nguyen was limping badly. They did not stop. The command center was ahead. Morrison could see Dreth warriors taking defensive positions, preparing for the final assault. There were at least 30 of them, maybe more. His squad had 12 soldiers remaining. Okay, he said quietly, this is it. Shaw, take Vance and flank left. Nen, you're with me on the right. Everyone else frontal assault on my signal. Shaw grabbed his arm. Jake, there's a lot of them. I know we might not make it. Morrison met her eyes. They had served together for 4 years. She was the best soldier he had ever known, and the closest thing he had to family outside of blood. He put his hand over hers. Then we make it count together, remember? Shaw's lips curved into a grim smile. Together they moved into position. Morrison counted down from 5 and then gave the signal. Assault was brutal and fast. Grenades went first, followed by a storm of gunfire. The Dreth returned fire, and Morrison watched 2 of his soldiers fall immediately. He did not stop. He could not stop. The moment he hesitated, the moment he allowed himself to think about the losses, they would all die. Megan Shaw was separated from the main group within minutes. She found herself alone in a side corridor, surrounded by 4 Dreth warriors. They were larger than her, stronger than her, and they had her cornered. Xylith watched through her drone, expecting to see a surrender or a quick death. Instead, she saw something else entirely. Shaw attacked. She moved with a speed and ferocity that seemed impossible for a wounded human. Her knife found the throat of the first Dreth before it could raise its weapon. She ducked under the swing of the second and drove her blade into its chest. The third grabbed her arm, and she used its own momentum to throw it into the fourth. While they were tangled together, she shot them both. When it was over, Shaw stood alone in the corridor, covered in blood that was not entirely her own. She was bleeding from a dozen new wounds. Her breathing was ragged and her hands were shaking. She laughed. Xylith did not understand the laughter. She filed it away as another example of human psychological unpredictability. Morrison found Voroth in the center of the command room. The Dreth commander was taller than him, heavier than him, and armed with a ceremonial blade that had killed 100 enemies. Morrison had lost his rifle. Somewhere in the fighting, he had only his combat knife. They faced each other across the bloodstained floor. You should surrender, Voroth said. Your species is impressive, but you cannot win this fight. I am the greatest warrior the sovereignty has ever produced. Morrison was exhausted. His body was broken in 6 ways. He had watched friends die today, and he would watch more die before it was over. But he did not surrender. Then let's find out, he said, and attacked. Fight was short and savage. Vor was skilled, and his blade opened cuts across Morrison's arms and chest. But Morrison did not stop coming. Every time The Dree pushed him back. He came forward. Again, every wound only seemed to make him angrier. Vorith had never faced an enemy like this. He had fought warriors who were stronger, faster, more skilled. But he had never fought someone who simply refused to fall. He hesitated. It was a tiny moment, barely a fraction of a second, but Morrison saw it. He ducked under Vorith's swing, stepped inside his guard, and buried his knife in the commander's throat. Vorith fell. His yellow eyes stared upward, wide with disbelief. The greatest warrior of the Dreth sovereignty had been killed by a creature half his size, bleeding from a dozen wounds, armed with nothing but a piece of sharpened metal, and the absolute refusal to lose. Cyril watched her commander die. She watched the humans secure the command center. She watched them begin treating their wounded, counting their dead, and preparing for the next phase of the operation. She activated the emergency broadcast system and sent a single message to all Dreth forces. This is Tactical Advisor Cyril. Commander Vorith is dead. All units retreat immediately. Do not engage the humans. I repeat, do not engage. She paused, then added one final note. It was meant for the records of the sovereignty, for the leaders who would study this battle in the years to come. These creatures are not brave. They are broken in a way that makes them unstoppable. Do not fight them on the ground. Do not give them something to protect. They will die before they stop, and they will make you pay for every inch of ground in blood. Learn from our mistake. Never engage humans in close combat again. Dreth began their retreat. The humans had won. The battle for Catherine IV was over. The Dreth had retreated, their forces scattered and demoralized. The colonists who had survived the occupation emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the pale light of the moon's artificial sun. Human medics moved among them, treating wounds and offering water and food. Jake Morrison sat alone on a piece of rubble near the colony's central plaza. His armor had been removed and bandages covered most of his torso. The doctors had counted 3 cracked ribs, 2 stab wounds, and more cuts and bruises than anyone had bothered to record. They had wanted to evacuate him to the medical bay on the Relentless. He had refused. He was waiting for the memorial. The surviving Marines gathered at sunset. There were 63 of them left out of the 212 who had made the drop. They stood in rows, their armor scorched and battered, their faces marked by exhaustion and grief. Behind them, the colonists watched in silence. Megan Shaw stood at the front, holding a data pad with a list of names. Her wounds had been treated, but she still moved slowly, favoring her left side, where a breath blade had found its mark. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady as she began to read. Private Danny Vance. The squad responded in unison. Present in memory. Sergeant Lisa Trent. Present in memory. Specialist Amanda Cole are present in memory. The names continued. 149 soldiers who had given their lives on this barren moon far from home. Shaw read each name clearly, giving each one the weight it deserved. Some of the Marines wept openly, others stood rigid, their jaws clenched, their eyes fixed on some distant point. Xylith watched from a distance. She had seen death before, had documented the end of entire civilizations, but she had never seen anything like this. The same humans who had fought like wild animals were now crying without shame. They held each Others spoke quiet words pressed there foreheads together in grief. She added a note to her final report. They grieve as intensely as they fight. For them, every life matters. Every death is a wound that never fully heals. I believe this is why they are so dangerous. They carry their fallen with them, not as weight, but as fuel. Every soldier they lose becomes another reason to win. When the names were finished, Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. He looked exhausted, barely able to stand, but his voice carried across the plaza. We came here because people needed help. We came here because nobody else would. He paused, looking at the faces of his surviving soldiers. We lost friends today. Brothers, sisters, family, and it hurts. It's supposed to hurt. The pain is how we know they mattered. He took a breath, wincing as his broken ribs protested. But we did what we came to do. We saved lives. We stopped an enemy that everyone said couldn't be stopped, and we did it. Together, his eyes moved across the crowd, meeting the gaze of every soldier who remained. The ones we lost are part of that victory. They are why we won, and we are going to carry them with us for the rest of our lives, because that's what family does. Shaw handed him a small device. Morrison pressed a button, and a holographic display flickered to life above the plaza. It showed images of the fallen soldiers, one after another. Smiling faces, candid moments, lives that had been full and real and precious. The humans watched in silence as the images cycled through. Some touched the air as if they could reach through the light and hold their friends one more time. Xylith felt something strange in her chest, a tightness she did not understand. She was an observer. She was supposed to remain detached, but watching these humans mourn, watching them honor their dead with such raw and genuine emotion, she found herself affected in ways she had not anticipated. Later, after the memorial, Xylith approached Lieutenant Morrison. He was sitting alone again, staring at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. May I ask you a question, Lieutenant? Morrison looked up. His eyes were tired but not hostile. Sure, Commander. Xylith sat down beside him, her long legs folded awkwardly against the rubble. I have observed your species throughout this battle. I have documented your tactics, your endurance, your refusal to surrender even when defeat seems certain. But there is something I do not understand. What's that? How do you endure the loss? Xylith gestured toward the plaza where the memorial had been held. You love your companions so deeply. You fight so hard to protect them. When they die, the pain must be unbearable. And yet you continue. You do not break. How? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. We don't forget. That's the point. He looked up at the stars. Every one of them mattered. Vance was 19 years old. First time off Earth. He was scared before the drop, but he never stopped fighting. Trent had 3 kids back home. She used to show us pictures every night. His voice caught, but he continued. They're gone. Nothing I do will bring them back, but I can make sure their sacrifice meant something. I can finish the mission. I can get the rest of my people home, and I can remember them. He turned to look at Xylith. That's why we fight so hard. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone we've ever lost, every friend, every family member, every stranger who died for something they believed in. They're all with us. Always. Xylith understood. Finally she understood. She returned to the gentle whisper that night and composed her final report to the Galactic Concord. It was longer than any document she had ever written, filled with observations, analysis, and recordings from the battle, but the conclusion was simple. She wrote, humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest, the most intelligent, or the longest lived. Their bodies are fragile, their lifespans brief, their technology unremarkable by Concord standards, but they possess something that no other species in my records demonstrates at this magnitude: the absolute refusal to yield. They bond with everything around them, their weapons, their vehicles, their comrades, even their enemies. They form attachments that seem almost irrational, and those attachments give them strength beyond what their bodies should be capable of producing. They will cross the void of space to recover a single fallen comrade. They will hold a position until their hearts stop beating. They will fight with broken bones and bleeding wounds and empty weapons, because the alternative is abandoning someone they care about. When I asked Lieutenant Morrison what drives them, he smiled and said that they are simply too stubborn to know when they have lost. I do not believe they are capable of losing. I believe they simply choose not to. The document spread through the Concord faster than any report in recent memory. Species that had dismissed humanity as a minor player in galactic politics began to reconsider. Military advisors studied the battle recordings with growing alarm. Diplomats sent urgent requests for human representatives. The Dreth sovereignty sued for peace within a week. Searle herself delivered the terms, her scales pale with something that might have been shame. The colonists of Catherine IV were compensated. The Dreth withdrew from 3 other contested systems as a gesture of good faith. Ambassador Ruth Donovan arrived on the colony to oversee reconstruction. She was a warm woman with an easy smile, patient with the traumatized colonists, and gentle with the grieving soldiers. Xylith watched her work and marveled at the contrast. The same species that had produced warriors like Morrison also produced healers like Donovan before she departed. Xylith found Morrison one last time. He was preparing to board a shuttle back to the Relentless, finally allowing himself to be treated properly for his injuries. Your report will change things, he said. The other species are going to look at us differently. Xylith inclined her head. Is that a concern? Morrison considered the question. Maybe, but we can't be anything other than what we are. Might as well let them know who they're dealing with. He extended his hand. Xylith had learned this gesture during her time aboard the human vessel. She took his hand with one of hers and felt the strength in his grip, the warmth of his skin. Safe travels, Lieutenant. You too, Commander. Xylith returned to the gentle whisper and watched the human fleet prepare for departure. The ships moved into formation, their hulls still marked by the damage of battle, their crews still mourning their losses, but they moved with purpose, with determination. With stubbornness. She added a final personal note to her report, one that would not be included in the official archives, but that she wanted to record for herself. I came to observe. I leave humbled. Stars do not tremble before humans because they are powerful. The stars tremble because humans do not understand that they should be afraid. They face the darkness of space, the hostility of the universe, the certainty of death, and they do not hesitate. they do not surrender, they simply keep moving forward, carrying their fallen with them, fighting for those they love. I have studied 100 species across 1,000 years. I have never encountered anything like humanity. I suspect I never will again. She watched the human fleet disappear into the void, and she understood finally why the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had arrived, and they were here to stay.